Now I want to show you the box sizing property in practice. Let's take a look on my project. As you can see, it's a simple project. In my body tag, I only have two div tags, one with the class of rect1, the second with the class of rect2, with the text content1 and content2 in it. And I placed some styles for both of these divs, where I set their width for 200 pixels, their height for 200 pixels, their background color for dark cyan. I placed margin 100 pixels from the top and the bottom to separate them from each other, and auto from left and right to center it horizontally on the website. I placed the font color to white just so we could see it better right here. I set the font size to 30 pixels so it could also be visible. And I used font family to Arial. Now let's open our DevTools. And let's check something. Let's mark the first element. You can see it right here. Let's check it. We can see we set its width and height to 200 pixels right here. When we mark it, we can see both of them have 200 pixels of their width and their height. We can also see it in the visual representation of our box model right here, that we have a content box of these elements set to 200 pixels of their width and their height, with no padding, no border, and we have this margin set to 100 pixels at the top and the bottom, and the auto value on the left and the right, which is computed right here to 362.5 pixel. So you can see that we set the width and the height of these elements to 200 pixels, and it's their actual size on the website, because all you can see right now is the content box, and we didn't place any padding and any border to our elements. So let's change that. Let's refer to our elements separately by the class name rect1 and rect2. Here's a tip for you. If you are with the text cursor on some line, when you press Shift, Alt, and arrow down, you can copy the whole line, as you can see. And it comes in handy when we want to change small thing in a line. We can copy the whole line. It works the same in the HTML, as you can see when I go to this line. When I have my div, all I have to press is Shift, Alt, and arrow down, and I can copy this whole line, then change the number of the third element, and you can see I can get my third element, but that's not what we want to have right now, so let's delete it. All we want to have is the CSS rule for our rect1 and CSS rule for our rect2. Now let's go to the rect1, and as you know, we have this property named box sizing, and by default all the elements on our website have this value, which is the content box. And if we save it right now, nothing will actually happen, because both of these elements already have this box sizing property with this content box value by default. But let's leave this just for our example and for our comparison to the second element, where I will change this property to box sizing border box. Now our width and height of this element will be calculated with the padding and the border of this element, so it will show the actual site on the website. Let's save our file. As you can see, nothing happened for now because we didn't add any paddings or borders to our elements. So let's add it. Let's refer to the div tag once again, because we want to style both of these elements. One has the box sizing of content box, the second one has box sizing border box, so we could easily see the difference between these values. Let's take care of the order of these properties in this rule. I think the margin property should be cut from here. and paste here. Because as we were saying, first we should place the properties related to the position and the display of our elements, then the properties of the box model, which is width, height, padding, border, and margin, and at the end, the properties that affects only the visual aspect of our element. So everything related to font, everything related to colors, etc. And the text properties, like text decoration, text transform, etc. So we got the width, the height, and the margin. Let's place some paddings to our elements. Let's make it 20 pixels. Let's save the file. And you can see the difference already. Our first element, which has the default box sizing property with the value of content box, got bigger by 20 pixels padding on each side of that element. We can see the padding, which is this inner margin, which separates the text from the edges of the element. And we can see we have the same amount of padding in our second element, but it's obviously smaller than the first one. It still has its 200 pixels height and 200 pixels width. The difference between these two elements now is that padding in the first one expanded the element's actual size by the value of padding, and in the second example, the size of the element remained the same, but the space needed from the padding was taken from the content box. So our content box got smaller, which we can even see with our text when the number 2 is not fitting our content box anymore, so it moved to another line. Let's see it in our DevTools. Let's select our first element right here. Let's go to a box model representation. And now we can see that our content box is still 200 pixels by 200 pixels like it was before. And in addition to that, we have this 20 pixels padding around it. So our element got bigger, related to this property, box sizing and content box value. Now let's go to the second element. Let's select it. And now we can see that our content box got smaller. Now it's 160 pixels by 160 pixels because the padding took the 20 pixels for each side of this element to be set to this element, but not change its width and height. I hope that now it's very understandable and clear to you. Now let's do something else. Let's set the border of our elements right here. Let's make it 10 pixels solid red, and the difference between those elements should be even more visible, as you can see right here. In the first example, our element has been expanded once again by this 10 pixel border, you can see. So now the width and the height of this element is 200 pixels plus 20 pixels from each side by the padding plus 10 pixels from each side by the border. So it's actually 230 pixels. But in the case of our second element, it's still 200 pixels. Then our content box inside got smaller by 10 pixels to get this border, and then by next 20 pixels to get this padding right here. Let's see it in our DevTools. Let's mark our first element. You can clearly see in the DevTools where is our content box, then where we have our padding box, then where we have our border, and this orange area outside our element is the margin. So DevTools are really helpful, and you should get really familiar with it as a web developer. Let's go to a visual representation of our box model, and we can clearly see that 200 pixels of the height and the width of our element refers only to the content box, which we can see. Then we have 20 pixels added as a padding and 10 pixels added as a border. So our element got expanded by the padding and the border. And if we go to our second element, let's click it. we can see that our content box got smaller. It's now 140 pixels times 140 pixels because this 20 pixels margin and this 10 pixels border was taken from the content box, making it smaller so that our element could be still 200 pixels times 200 pixels, which you can see in our DevTools when we hover on our element. Now let's do something else. I will change a little bit my project to show you the next example. I changed a little bit our project to show you something else. Let's take a look. I used the float left property to place those two elements in the same line and changed the background color of the second element so we could see it better. Now, as you may remember, by default, all the elements have the box sizing property with the content box value. When I save it, nothing actually happens because it's already there. And why I'm saying you that this value is not so much comfortable and convenient for a developer, because we wanted to place those two elements in the same one line. But then let's say we have to add some padding to these elements. Let's say 40 pixels. Let's now see what's going to happen. Those elements do not fit one line anymore because they got expanded by 40 pixels padding on each side of the element. So now what we have to do is to recalculate their width and their height, and for example make it smaller by 40 pixels. So we have to do something like this: 260 times 260. We have to check if they get fit into one line. Once again, it's not very intuitive and it's unpractical, so we are not supposed to do so, because by every change we have to recalculate everything and we can get easily confused by it. But the solution is changing this value from content box to border box like this. Now we can see we set our width to 300 pixels, our height to 300 pixels, and added this padding, which is 40 pixels. But when we get the box sizing property with the border box value and save our file, everything is back in one line. As you can see, this padding is still applied, but our content box got smaller. So the original size of our elements, which is 300 pixels times 300 pixels, can still be applied. Now, even if we change this padding to 60 pixels, for example, it still remains in the same line. Or even if we get rid of this padding, it's still in the same line. Those elements have the same size, no matter what changes we will do. Add some padding, like 20 pixels. Add a border, 10 pixels solid red, like this. They still remain in the same line, but if we comment this property, so the box sizing will go to the default content box. It still fits the same line, but that's just because we didn't use higher values. But if we make our border 10 pixels thicker, they're no longer fitting into one line and go to the new line. But with this property, everything stays how it's supposed to stay. All the changes made by padding and the border are made inside our elements, and the original size of our elements stays the same. Now I want to show you something else. I want to show you how the content of an element expand this element, as well as expanding the parent element and the further ancestors elements. We have a div with the class of item inside the header tag, inside our body tag. Now let's open our DevTools Let's expand our elements tab right here. Let's select our body. And you can see its height is 0. Inside we have our header tag. And you can see as well that its height is also 0. Inside our header, we have our div with the class of item, which with no surprise also has a height of 0. Now, let's place some text into our div. Let's save our element. Let's go to the DevTools once again. Go to our div. And now you can see that our div has 36 pixels of its height, which affects as well its parent element, which is the header, which you can see also has 36 pixels of its height, which also affects the whole body of our document, which now also has 36 pixels of the height. And when we place more text, so more content to our nested div, it will expand. As you can see, now it has 72 pixels of its height, which also affects its parent, which is the header, which has the same height, and the further ancestor, which is the body, which also expands. By default, the parent's element grow thanks to the children elements and their content. Of course, we can style it. For example, let's refer to our div with the class of item. Let's set its min width. Let's set it to 500 pixels, like this. Let's check it in our DevTools. Of course, I meant minimum height, not minimum width. Like this. Let's check it in our DevTools. And we can see that we have small amount of text, but our div is 500 pixels high because that's its minimum height. So in this case, its parent, which is header, also have to be 500 pixels high. And its parent, which is the body, also have to be 500 pixels high. And as we know, this is the minimum height. So if we copy this text, add some more text into it, it will obviously expand. Now we can see it's bigger. Let's place some more text just in case. Now let's check it. And now we can see it got bigger. Now it's 720 pixels, as well as its parent, which you can see right here, as well as its ancestor, which is the body tag. So this is how it works. Of course, we can set as well its max height to 500 pixels. Now we know that this element has 500 pixels, which you can see this is the end of this element. But as we were saying before, the text stands out and go beyond our element, which we can, for example, hide using the overflow property with the value of hidden. And now the rest of the text is no longer rendered, so the text beyond our element haven't got created during the rendering of our website, but we know it still exists in our HTML code as well as in our document object model, which we can see we have the whole text, but on our website only the part of it got rendered and is visible and exists to the user. Now let's go for the last time in this section to the theory for a moment once again.